Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about aspects of Yedo 8. This is the penultimate form for Yedo, right? So it sounds like we're kind of coming to, a culmination of, all the fun stuff we've been learning in Yedo. 9 is going to be a fun one. So in general, the last forms per series are going to be the longer forms. So Shimsong in 12 are the longest in Sangsu. 9 is going to be the longest in Yedo. 7 is going to be the longest in Bangkok. I have no idea how many jump back there are, and we're not going to have any videos on them, so there's that. So form 8 is going to be actually one of the shorter ones, and it's going to have a lot of things that are similar to things you've seen, but we're using them in a different way, or we're going to be using them in such a way that it's going to be a little bit different from 9 in particular, right? So 9 is like the culmination of Yedo, just like how Shimsong is a culmination of Sangsu, and allegedly Bangkok 7 is a culmination of Bangkok. So let's take a look, right? So there's going to be some things we're going to be comparing this form against 9, and also just taking moves we've learned, right? Because there aren't that many new moves per se in 8, but we use them in a slightly different way. So let's take a look. In this video, we're actually going to talk about 4 potential things, simply because 2 of them are, well, one of them is like super basic, right? So it's a new move, it's just something that happens. There isn't really much more to say with it, right? So like it wouldn't really make sense for me to have that be one of the major 3, but I still want you to kind of like know that it exists and know it was a modification to the form. But we also have another move that is newer, and now that we have it, we're going to see a lot more in future forms, again, especially in 9. So the first one is going to be, I'll do the slightly less fun one, and that's going to be the flat broadside block. The broadside block is a strange one, right? So it happens in the middle of the form, so it's after we do both of our hitting up and then fake full cuts, right? So it's going to be right after that. So if you take a look, so in terms of the form, the idea is we're deflecting someone's thrust, we're going to stab with our own thrust, and we're going to use that broadside probably just to clear the area, and then do a nice clearing cut. Actually, the next move is going to be the next thing we're going to be talking about, but, so notice that the flatness of the blade. So it's not like what we see in Sangsu 3, right? So unlike in Sangsu 3, this is actually just using the flat of the sword as not using the ridge of the sword. Now the question might be, why the flatness, right? So we do use the ridge of the sword in Sangsu 3, and again many other forms on top of that to get lots of good power, right? Because using the ridge, the false edge of the blade, is really strong, right? And also you can use the curvature of your sword to actually help guide, again, the opponent attack and really grind it away out of your way for you to counter. So what is why use the flat? Because it's weaker, right? You're gonna get more wind resistance because it's flat going through the air, as opposed to at least having a little bit of curvature kind of like help you kind of like siphon through some of the air. So yeah, so this one is going to be the short one because the explanation, again, I learned this fairly recently, so like in the past couple of years, this has been a change, so if you haven't seen it before, it would be good to implement it. But the best I can kind of think about this one is you're actually going to be using it to, again, either just kind of get your space. It's kind of like more just a random kind of like clearing kind of idea as opposed to necessarily blocking. It's kind of like just an umbrella because you're going to be going through a 360 degree. So it'll be a little bit easier to kind of keep it flat as opposed to constantly having that angle kind of moving through. It's a little bit harder as opposed to being able to use equal and opposite motion to kind of help you get a little bit more of that oomph in that block. Another thing that might be happening is that this is going to be blinding the person with the sun, right? Because like, it's going to be easier to kind of like reflect the sun into someone's eye if it's flat. That's probably not going to be the main intent, right? Because you should almost never like resort to tricks when you can actually just beat them with a better technique. But it's just an idea that might be out there just play with. The next move is again one that you've already seen, and it's that twisting into a yoke, so to say. Now we've done yokusose before, we've rarely done it, so we're actually ending up in this kind of position, right? Now, just like what I was talking about before with the comparison with 8 and 9, you also see this in 9, and you also see this again in future forms, right? So especially in Banguk, because 9 is going to be the end, and this is the first time we're really seeing it in that capacity. So what's the point, right? So this would be another kind of like quick one, right? So like this one was kind of just like all right, I'm just getting my space. It's a little bit easier to do this as opposed to tucking properly, right? So then it's like, all right, why do this thing, right, as opposed to what we did in Sanction 9, and just have it clear this way? So there's going to be a few things going on, right? So for one, you can unwind and get some power, right? So if we're here, and just like in the form, we're actually going to unwind and come up with our 2 uppercuts, right? So you can actually do more twist-based cuts from this position as opposed to what we've done in Sanction 9. Sanction 9, we're here, we can still, again, do that neck strike, we can maybe do some say counters or something along those lines, but from this position, although it looks strange, in our next form, we're going to be turning it into a thrust. But from here, I can actually just do a lot of different combinations. It'll be harder for you, my enemy, to know what I'm going with because you'll see my back first before you see an uppercut, before you see a cross cut or a dive cut or a thrust, maybe, right? So it's a nice disguising stance, right, for the next move. It is actually pretty stable once you get used to the motion of it, because you're just going to, again, let your motion keep going and going to naturally sink in. So this might look like it's really uncomfortable. It's actually pretty comfortable, right? So knowing, again, the placement of my feet, where my hips are, I can, again, feel pretty safe here. I can more or less look 360. I can see here, I can look very easily, right? And be able to strike really at almost any position, with the exception of straightforward. Actually, no. Bang, if I really need to, right? Not strongly, but I can do it from that stance. So it's a really good position to just do a bunch of stuff from, as opposed to this one, it's hard for me to kind of see what's going behind me without looking, again, all the way one way. Make sense? The next move has a lot of different interpretations. The one that I like is really the most simple, right? But there are a lot of different things you can do, at least in terms of weaving a narrative around this. And that's going to be, I'm going to call it the eye gouge because that's the way that someone I trust, right, taught it to me that way. So it's like, all right, so it's an eye gouge, whether or not it's true. We're going to kind of play with the idea. We're going to talk about the eye gouge. So let's take a look. Notice we're ending from our uppercut. We're going to be turning and thrusting towards an opponent that's going to roll into a defense, right? So this one has, again, a few potential interpretations that we can play with. So one of them is, again, as I mentioned, and as I'm titling it, the eye stab. So for example, if I am facing you, dear listener, over here, I'm just going to stab into your eye, maybe even catch like the corner, drag it through. So now you're either turning or you're, dying, and then I'm getting back into my grip, right? So getting back into a more comfortable fighting position. So obviously, if I'm actually able to get enough power, and you can get a pretty decent amount, you can throw your shoulder into it, you're stepping with it, right? So you're gonna get a lot of power into that thrust. If you do get into the eye, although you can survive, again, being stabbed in the eye, again, there's an interesting study of people falling asleep, and like chopsticks go through their eye and they wake up and they don't realize there's something puncturing their brain. But that said, with enough force, with enough displacement and severing, a good solid stab to the face will be enough to, even if it doesn't kill them per se, it's enough to kind of like make them back off, and then you can go in for our strike. So yes, if you can get in for that nice face stab, by all means, good, right? Now another way that I've been taught this, so this was actually the way it was taught to me by my instructor, so Master Paul, is you're actually going to be using the blade to cut, so cut shallowly. So the arcing motion is going to be very different. It's almost going to look more like you're slashing down this way into a defense. So it's almost like you're taking this portion and you're slicing in this way. So it's not intended to stab, you're just slicing in here. Now obviously that's going to be better for like a wider blade like a jingam as opposed to a boken or mukam that we're using, which is very, very shallow in terms of our depth of our sword. But even so, it's going to be a lot of trial and error, right? Because just trying to slice this way, right, is a very like surgical strike as opposed to just throwing a tip into someone's face and trying to, dislodge their brain. So it's something that's out there. I just want you to know that it exists and it's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of different, again, cuts and stuff from this half guard position, which I don't know why I'm mentioning half guard because it's not really doing what we're doing here, but kind of like to show you the way you can do it, right? So you can actually try to do something with that, but again, it's a little strange. It's going to be hard to actually pull off as well. And the third interpretation for that same stab, and this is going to be true, this was taught to me by my second instructor, so Master Bergman, right, so Chief Master of the East Coast, right, and that's going to be more or less using it to slice with a stabbing motion. Now that might sound strange the first time you think of it, but give it a gander, right? So if you're coming in this way and almost like you're slicing in here, the idea is the blade is coming here and it's going to be slicing in this way, right? So it's coming in, slicing probably the jugular, right? Just because that's a good place just to stab. Or slicing in across this way, going for that side of the jugular, right? But the idea of using a stab as a slice, again, making contact and grinding through, again, sawing almost through the flesh, is a fairly new technique, right? So if this is the first time we're doing it, that'd be pretty cool, right? And it's just a different way to use your weapon, right? Now this does bring me back to a different something else entirely, right? Because again, I do intend to come back to HEMA, so so y'all at LART, I do intend to. But the way that is that flower point that they count points, right? So it's in kendo and in a lot of our gumdosa sparring matches, at least before we kind of figure out what we're really doing, it's usually typical for us to make contact, like pop, right? And that's going to be a point. But with longsword and HEMA, or at least, and again the flower point method, if you slide down half the length of your sword, that also counts as a cut because you're cutting through something. It's going to be the same idea here. If I make contact and slice through this way, it's going to do a lot of damage, right? So especially if you're going something that's unarmored, obviously that's not going to do that much damage against armor. But assuming best case scenarios, right? Contact slice is going to be really, really effective and a different way to use, again, your same sword. And the last technique that I want to talk about is one we've seen quite a while ago. So this is actually from Sangsu 7, and that's going to be the Hachiba, right? I'm probably mispronouncing it, right? This is just the way that I was taught it, so if it is in fact something else, I'm just going to call it the Hachiba. But the idea of that big, powerful strike, right? So for example, now just leading up to it, right? So we have that knee block up, Hachiba, knee block up, Hachiba. That should raise a red flag, right? So the idea is you're knee blocking, right? But then you're turning your back to the person and allegedly cutting forward, right? And then you're doing again, and you're going to a 90-degree Hachiba. So that seems really strange, right? So like in 7, for example, in Sangsu 7, it made perfect sense, right? I'm running out of space, I'm going to Hachiba, and I'm going to get out of the way, and now move around that either crumpled body or like the person, right? This is weird, right? So like I'm making heavy eye contact with my opponent, and then haha, right? Same thing, you. So I'm not even taking care of him with this strike because I'm going 90 degrees. I'm looking at you, dear listener, and then I am dispatching someone else, right? So that seems really strange. That means I dispatched 2 different people but left two people behind me in close range, close enough where I can do a knee block. That's really weird, right? So that should be like, again, raising red flags, it should be, causing existential dread, all sorts of those kinds of things, but fear not. This is also going to be a new-ish technique. It's going to be using the Hachiba to do something a little bit different. I put it to you that the Hachiba is actually dispatching the person behind you as you cut. Now, originally I was going to have one of my students here for me to demonstrate, and then I realized it would be really hard to do that safely because it is actually a very, very powerful technique. So be careful, don't actually practice against anyone because it's really hard to do it safely. But I'm going to do it kind of like safely here. So imagine someone is over here, right? So I'm going to knee block. Again, maybe they're going for my knee. I'm going to block it, bring it up. They're still there. I'm even going to kind of shimmy in. So it's almost like my tailbone is closer to them. So if I'm here, knee block, up, they're right there. So again, kind of imagine where they are. They're going to be again, like 2 feet or so that way. And as I bring it back, think about the rolling of the shoulders, get that little bit extra power here, and imagine how much power you can generate in that region where you just pop, right? So that's going to cause a lot of damage, and it's going to be in such a way that the person is not really trained to deal with, right? So the blade, first of all, is coming up this way. So one reason why vertical cuts are so annoying is, first of all, they're hard to block. They go against the grain of the armor. If done low enough, are unsportsmanlike. But just look at the sheer amount of power you can generate from near your shoulder blade. So opposite my shoulder, right? So knee block, up. Just see just how easy it is to kind of like lurch your shoulder into it and just pop. So imagine if I'm like almost like tailbone close to them and that sword comes up this way. Even if it is a little bit on the far side, that's going to be enough to catch their chin and strike it up. Now, it probably won't be an instant kill like in the movies, right? Unless if it slides up the jugular, it cuts off something, maybe cuts the throat or something like that. Hypothetically, right? All these hypothetical, I know it sounds really gory, but again, these were allegedly developed to fight against people. So the Hachiba, right? So even if I'm far away, it will cut them. If they're close, it's going to dislodge them, right? So if they're close enough to more or less be close enough to me here, so long as I can get behind it, I can forcibly draw this open and move them one way or the other, right? So if the blade is here, they have to turn to kind of like bail out of the way, right? So most likely they will get hurt in the process, and you're going to be cleared, right? So maybe even you're striking the same person if you want to think of it that way, right? So you're here, you just lodge them, they're rolling this way, right? So maybe my blade was slightly to my right, so they're evading off this way, and then maybe I'm striking their sword out of the way and finishing them again. So this is a combination, again, of my countless days of just thinking about making all this make sense, make every move make sense. This is one of my homebrews that I really, really like. I found it's actually really powerful, but be careful because it's hard to do it again safely. So as always, can we retcon? So the first one was that flat block. Can you do it? Yes, right? So we do something very similar to it in Form 3. You can also do something sort of like in Form 2 when you're going around the head for diagonals. But again, for what purpose, right? So using the false edge, or again, the back of the sword is going to be a lot stronger. It's going to cover you more effectively. It's going to damage your wrists less if there is resistance. It's just in general, this is something that you may not want to retcon, but know that you can do it if you have a certain desired effect, right? So if I want to blind the person at a distance, maybe doing that, right? If I want to be able to kind of get a little extra oomph this way, but then not really be able to do much from there after that, sure. So that's something that you can retcon, but be very aware of, again, the specific niche that sort of technique fills. We also have some of our other techniques, right? So we have that twisted stance. So we do see yoke sose, right? So we see it as early as Sangsu 6, right, with our punch, right, in a very similar situation, right? So that particular stance is really good at kind of checking everything around you, right? Now, if you want to, you can try to maybe do something a little bit fancier with that 6, right? So if you're here, because it's very similar, right? You're just instead you're striking down. You can also still know, you can in general see everywhere behind you except for this one quadrant over here. Unlike actually this one, actually should be the same, right? You can still look over, you can still see everything a little bit more effectively. So you can see probably like what is that angle? 270? A little less than 270. I'm going to be generous, going 225, right? So being able to see it starts at 180, you can see a little bit past. So you have a pretty good, just a sheer amount of visage, right? You can kind of see. So can you kind of retcon again that idea? Sure, right? Now in the form, in 6, we're just going to strike and just move forward this way, right? So we're not going to be twisting and hiding our motions as much, but we could have if we wanted to. So what about that stab? Can we stab someone in the eye? Yeah, right? So our first stab, if you kind of discount the original Sang-Soo 4, which is no longer a stab anymore, right? Sang-Soo 5 has a stab to the solar plexus, but Sang-Soo 6 is the first one with the overhead thrust. So yeah, so you can imagine going to the eye, and if it makes contact, twisting, right? So it kind of either, again, dislodge them one way or the other, or puncture their brain, right? But yeah, so you can do it that way, but I also do like the idea of integrating that contact slice as well. So like even if we do something similar to that in really any of our other thrusts, right? So I'm thinking kind of like 6, so Sang-Soo 6, where we do that deflect thrust. So maybe you're making contact with the other side of their wrist here and just like severing it, right? So like severing the inside as you stab towards the solar plexus. That is absolutely something that you can do. So we have a bunch of different things we can do with that contact thrusting motion. Probably not so much with the slicing, with the like cutting, with almost like a reverse kind of cut this way. That's very niche again, so similar to again that broadside technique, which you can do, but again it's going to be again very, very specific. And the last technique was the Hachiba, using the back end of the cut. Now you can obviously do this with other techniques. If you really want to do it, maybe as early as I'm going to be very dubious about this, but let's just say we finish our first set here. As we turn, if I want to like finish off the person here and then drive through, it's going to be supposed to be still a right cut, but you can use that extension to hit the person behind you. You can. Now the Hachiba in 7 is really directed towards the person in front of you. You can maybe think about, because that's the person that you stabbed, right? So maybe you're going to Hachiba them and also the person in front of you that you're bailing out of the way. You can obviously do that as well. So this is one of those forms that half of them you can retcon a lot, right? So again, that thrust and the Hachiba have a lot of good stuff, and there's a lot of the other techniques that are just very, very specific to what they're doing. But with that, so keep thinking about all these forms. So keep training, stay humble, and stay safe. It's going to be quite a year. So 2021, right? So stay safe. Haidong.